So this movie is on plotting, building charts and focusing on the plot area in the chart. We're going to begin by creating plotting breaks in the data, where the data is grouped and each of the groups are independently plotted. Next, we're going to look at formatting part of a line, and then we're going to apply a technique that allows us to mark significant events on the chart. We're also going to use a technique that allows us to automatically format certain data points that match certain criteria. We're going to build a chart with floating bars, and then we're going to use that technique to build a Gantt chart. So I have some data on this worksheet, and it's the stock trading data for Google, G-O-O-G, during the period that runs through 2011, 2012, and the first 3 months of 2013. I've got the open, the high, low, and the close, and I've got the second quarter of 2013 forecasted. And then I've sort of done several things with the data to allow me to establish the format that I need to feed the different charts using the different techniques that we're going to cover in this movie. So the first thing we're going to look at is creating plotting breaks. And to do that, we need to create a chart, and to do that, I need to select the data. So I'm going to select all of the dates, which are going to be the category axis labels, and then I'm going to select all of the data in columns I, J, and K. Column I being the closing price for 2013, column J being the closing price for 2012, and K is 2011. So now I'm going to insert a chart, and I'm going to insert a line chart, and then I'm going to move that chart to its own chart sheet, chart 1. And your counter may be different. You may see another number other than 1, depending upon whether you close your workbook and open it back up again, which you will start again at 1 if you do that. Unless there's a chart sheet that already has that name, then it'll start at 2. So by doing this, by splitting out the different years in different columns, they're plotted on the graph in a similar fashion. Each one of the different years has segmented itself from the other years. So it's a way to visually display the data groups that you've set up. In this case, it's the years. And of course, you would want to change the legend labels to reflect that, and not say Series 1, Series 2, Series 3. It'd be 2013, 2012, and 2011. So I'm going to go back to our data, and we're going to create a chart that's similar, only we're going to include the forecasted quarter, the second quarter of the year, which, by the way, I used the forecast function to do that. But don't ever use that to make stock trading decisions, by the way. So once again, I'm going to select the category for the category axis, and this time we have 4 groups of data. And before I create the chart, I want to call attention to the fact that I have column H and column I in row 9 the same data point. And what this is going to do is connect the 2 lines. So 2013, the first quarter and the second quarter will be plotted as a single line. And then what we're going to do is change the formatting to the forecasted part of that line. So once again, insert line chart, clicking the line chart, moving the line chart to what is now chart 2, we can see our forecasted information was assigned another series, series 1. And maybe the different color is enough, but we can select that line, right-click it, left-click Format Data Series from the shortcut menu, and then do some other things to the line to call attention to the fact that it's very different than the other plotted lines on the chart because it's forecast numbers, it's not actual numbers. So we can change the line perhaps to some dashes, closing that and clicking off. So that's 2 different ways to plot the lines. You can create different data series that have the lines break, or you can have the data series connect one to another and show a continuous line and still have the ability to reformat part of the line that makes up the data series. So going back to our data again, the next thing we're going to do is plot a chart, and we're going to use the data for 2011 to do that. And we're going to call out the fact that Google announced that the AdWords Express is a faster, simpler way for small businesses to start advertising. So I'm going to select the data series by first selecting 2011, hold the Control key down, select the data points that are listed in column K, go back to the Insert tab, drop down the line chart choices that I have and left click on the first one, and then I'm going to move the chart to its own chart sheet, chart 3. And I'm not suggesting to you that I think or I've concluded that the change in the stock price had something to do with that event. It may or may not have had to do with that event, but it is an event that may be worth calling out on the chart. So to do that, we're going to go to the Insert tab, left click in the Illustrations group, Shapes, left click the line, left click the beginning point, hold down the Shift key so that we can draw a perfectly straight line down to the date in which this event occurred, release the left mouse button, release the Shift key, and we've called out that data point. Granted, it's hard-coded on the chart, so if you redraw the chart using some new data, you're going to have to redraw the line. But now we can go back to the Insert tab, left-click Text Box, draw a text box on the chart, and then explain what took place on that date. And I'm not going to type it all out. I don't type that well anyway, and it wouldn't be much fun to watch me type. So I'm going to click off of that and go back to our data again. The next technique involves, again, segmenting the data into different columns on the worksheet. And I've used a formula that enabled me to identify the top 10 values in the closing price. And column N has the values that are not the top 10 values. Column O has the values that are the top 10 values. So obviously the closing price isn't going to show up in both columns. It'll show up in one or the other. And I've used the large function to do that. So I'm going to select what's going to be the column labels, hold down the Control key, select what's going to become the two data series, and this time I'm going to press F11 and create the default chart, which for me right now is the column chart. And the columns have been drawn as a single line. The way to change that is to double-click the horizontal axis and change the axis type to a text type. And when I close that, the lines have become a column, which may be more along the lines of what you want to see on your chart. The other thing that we might want to do, double-clicking the axis again, is to flip-flop the categories in reverse order. And that shows the time going from left to right, beginning at 2011 and ending at 2013. And when we did that, the location of the vertical axis labels changed. So I'm going to close that and double-click the vertical axis and move the axis labels to the high point, which is the reverse of what it would seem intuitively that we would need to do, because that's the low point according to the date range. But since we converted the horizontal axis from dates to text, Excel can't determine what is the beginning date and the ending date in our data series. So I'm going to close that, and what we've done is create two different data series. Series 1 are all the values that are below the top 10 closing prices for the month. Series 2 are the top 10. And since this chart is being drawn using the data in columns N and O as references for the series, and those values in columns N and O are dynamically driven, if I were to change the formula to pull out or call out the top 5 values, I'm editing both of these formulas, and then I'm going to select both of them, Control C, double-click the fill handle, and copy that down. The chart, of course, changes accordingly. So going back to the data once again, the next thing we're going to do is float some bars on a bar chart. And the reason why we're going to do that in this case is to visually display the volatility in the stock price for each given month. And once again, like in the prior examples, the key is to setting up the data in the first place. And so, since I want to show the volatility in any given month, my focus is to display the range of the stock price. But I want to show the range from the low price and the high price. So I've got the trading range in column S, and I've got the low price which is the beginning point in column R. So now we're going to select what's going to become the labels for the vertical axis since we're doing a bar chart. Hold down the Control key and select the two data ranges. Go to Insert, drop down the list of bar charts, and create a stacked bar by left-clicking once. And then we're going to move the chart to its own chart sheet, which is now chart 5. So just as before, since our category labels are dates on the vertical axis, I'm going to double-click that and change that to text so that we see bars instead of lines plotted. And now I'm going to close that and left-click the first series, and then right-click to get the shortcut menu, left-click Format Data Series, go to the Fill options, and then left-click No Fill. Close that and then click Off. So we end up with a chart that just shows the volatility in the stock price for any given month. We can use this technique to create a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart displays a series of steps that take place in a sequence of steps that involves a project usually. And those steps are plotted to show the duration and the starting point so that you get a visual display of the entire sequence of events that are involved in the project. The first thing I'm going to do is select the data, because once again, the setup of the data is important in applying all of these techniques. And then I'm going to go to Insert, go to the bar drop-down list of chart options I have, and click Stack Bar. Once again, we're going to move that chart to its own chart sheet. And I'm going to begin by deleting the legend, selecting it and pressing delete. And since my steps are showing in reverse order, it starts at the top with step 7 and ends at step 1. I'm going to double click the vertical axis to get the Format Axis dialog box, where first I'm going to show the categories in reverse order, and for our purposes it's showing them in the order that we want, and then go down to the horizontal axis crosses at the maximum category, which is step 7, so that we can get those dates displayed at the bottom as opposed to the top of the chart. Now I'm going to close that, left click the Start Date Data Series, which I can also select, by the way, by going to the Layout tab in the Chart Tools, left click the drop down, and it's already selected or highlighted because I already selected it. If it wasn't, I could left click Series Start Date, then I'm going to right click one of those bars and then left click the Format Data Series from the shortcut menu. I want to go to the Fill options, left click No Fill, which is similar to what we did to show the volatility for the stock prices for Google for any given month. And I'm going to close that, left click off of that. We can further refine this though by double clicking the horizontal axis to get the Format Axis dialog box, and then changing the minimum and maximum point to get rid of the white space that shows before the first of the year. So I actually want to show the data beginning at the 1st of January 2013 and ending maybe the 21st of January. Close. And we've created our Gantt chart. So we used some plotting techniques to first show breaks in the plotted lines. In this case, we have different years that are plotted. And then we used a little twist on that technique to continue a line. And that was all driven by the way we set up the data that feeds the chart, so that we can call out the fact that the dotted line is a forecasted series of numbers and not the actual series. And then we drew a line on a chart to call out a significant event that occurred on July 1st, 2011, and used a text box to explain that. Of course, I didn't explain all of it, I just put the date. And then I used the large function in Excel to split the data up into two different categories, one showing the top 5 closing prices for Google, and the other category showing all of the rest of the closing prices for Google that weren't the top 5. That created two different series for us that we can format. And since the chart is driven from the data and linked to the data, and the data is dynamically derived, any changes in the data will be reflected on the chart. So when we change the top 10 to the top 5, we get the top 5 charted accordingly. We then created a bar chart where we have floating bars that visually display the volatility of the stock price for any given month for Google. And then we utilize that technique to build a Gantt chart.